The Galactic Academy of Stellar Command floated in the void between three dying stars, its crystalline spires catching the last gasps of ancient light. For 700 years, beings from across the galaxy had come here to prove themselves worthy of commanding the great fleets that protected civilization from the darkness beyond known space. Marcus Chun had never expected to be among them. He pressed his face against the transport shuttle's viewport, watching the Academy grow larger as they approached. The structure was magnificent and terrifying, a fusion of technologies from a dozen species, all working in harmony to create something that defied comprehension. Spires of living crystal grew alongside towers of pure energy, while bridges of compressed starlight connected floating platforms that housed different sections of the massive institution. First time seeing the Academy, human? The voice belonged to Zefek, a Carillion whose scaled hide shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated mild amusement. His species had been among the founding members of the Galactic Coalition, their natural ability to navigate hyperspace making them invaluable as pilots and navigators. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Around him, the other passengers, all species he'd only read about in textbooks, chatted easily among themselves. There was Vextar, whose rocky carapace marked him as one of the silicon-based Greth. Beside him sat Lyralii, an ethereal Vorthak whose translucent skin revealed the flowing patterns of energy that served as her nervous system. Each of them belonged here. Each had been selected by their respective governments as the best and brightest their species had to offer. Marcus was here because of a clerical error. The mistake had happened 3 months ago when the Coalition's recruitment algorithms had flagged his test scores. Someone, somewhere, had confused his stellar navigation exam with that of Marcus Chun, 7742, a genetically enhanced human from the Luna colonies who actually deserved to be here. By the time the error was discovered, Marcus was already halfway through the preliminary training, and the Coalition's bureaucracy moved too slowly to correct such things before the Academy's annual intake. So here he was, an ordinary human from Earth's Australian territories, surrounded by the genetic elite of the galaxy's most advanced species. "Don't look so nervous," Zefek continued, his translation collar rendering his clicks and whistles into perfect standard galactic. "The Academy has a way of surprising people. Sometimes the ones who seem least likely to succeed are the ones who change everything." Before Marcus could respond, their shuttle docked with a soft thump that barely registered through the inertial dampeners. The airlock hissed open, and cool, recycled air filled with the scent of ozone, and something faintly floral washed over them. They were met by Instructor Valdris, a tall, imposing figure whose species Marcus didn't recognize. Her skin had a metallic sheen, and her eyes were solid black with no visible pupils. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made Marcus's bones vibrate. "Welcome to the Academy," she said, her gaze sweeping over the new arrivals. "You are here because your respective governments believe you have what it takes to command in the void. Over the next 4 cycles, you will be tested in ways your home worlds never imagined. Most of you will fail. Some of you will excel. A very few will prove worthy of the final trial." She paused, and Marcus felt those black eyes linger on him for a moment longer than the others. "Follow me. Your new lives begin now." The Academy's interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Corridors curved impossibly through space, their walls displaying real-time views of distant galaxies. Gardens flourished in zero gravity, tended by small maintenance drones that looked like mechanical butterflies. In one vast chamber, Marcus glimpsed what appeared to be a miniature star contained within a sphere of pure force, providing light and warmth to a collection of structures that seemed to shift and change even as he watched. "That's the Crucible," Zefek whispered as they passed, "where they say the final trial takes place. No one knows what happens in there, but every few years, someone emerges as the new supreme commander of the fleet. And if they fail?" Marcus asked. Zefek's patterns dimmed. "No one who fails the final trial has ever been seen again." They were assigned quarters in the Academy's residential sector, each room tailored to its occupant's species needs. Marcus's was Spartan, but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and a viewport that looked out onto the infinite stars. On his desk, he found a data pad containing his class schedule and academic materials. The coursework was daunting. Stellar mechanics, quantum navigation, xenobiology, tactical analysis, fleet command theory, subjects that would challenge even the most gifted minds. Marcus stared at the list and felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in his stomach. These were beings who had been bred and trained for this moment. He was just a maintenance engineer who'd scored well on a test because he'd spent his childhood obsessing over starship manuals. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. When it opened, he was surprised to find a human woman about his age, though her bearing and the subtle modifications to her bone structure marked her as one of the enhanced colonist breeds. "You must be Marcus," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Saracen 7742. I believe there's been some confusion about our identities." Marcus stared at her. "You're the one who was supposed to be here." "Technically, yes. But after reviewing the situation, I decided not to correct the error." She smiled, and Marcus noticed that her eyes had the faint golden tinge that marked her as having enhanced cognitive processing. "You see, I've been following your work. That paper you published on unconventional navigation solutions, the one where you proposed using gravitational lensing to create shortcuts through folded space. Brilliant work. That was just theoretical speculation." Marcus protested. "I'm not even formally trained in stellar mechanics." Which is exactly why it was brilliant. You're not constrained by conventional thinking. Sarah entered his room without invitation and settled into his desk chair. The Academy doesn't just need the best and brightest. It needs people who can think differently. The universe has a way of presenting problems that can't be solved by following the textbook. So you're saying you want to stay and see what happens? I'm saying the Coalition is facing threats it doesn't fully understand. The Void Wraiths are becoming bolder, pushing deeper into settled space. Our fleets are powerful, but they're fighting according to strategies that were developed centuries ago. Maybe it's time for some unconventional thinking. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into his studies with desperate intensity. The Academy's teaching methods were unlike anything he'd experienced. Immersive simulations that place students directly into historical battles, telepathic knowledge transfers that dumped centuries of tactical wisdom directly into their minds, and practical exercises that took place aboard real starships patrolling the galaxy's border regions. He struggled at first, particularly with subjects that required intuitive understanding of alien psychology and culture, but gradually he began to find his footing. His background as an engineer gave him a unique perspective on the practical limitations of starship systems, and his unconventional thinking often led him to solutions that surprised his instructors. It was during a tactical simulation in his third month that he first attracted serious attention. The scenario was a classic, defending a convoy of civilian transports from a superior force of Void Wraith raiders. The traditional solution involved precise formation flying and coordinated fire patterns that maximize the defensive fleet's firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. Marcus took a different approach. Instead of engaging the raiders directly, he used the convoy's industrial fabricators to rapidly construct a field of debris that mimicked the electromagnetic signature of destroyed ships. When the raiders moved in to finish off what they thought were crippled vessels, Marcus had the real convoy emerge from hyperspace behind them, trapping the attackers in a crossfire. The simulation ended with the complete destruction of the raider force and minimal damage to the convoy. "Unconventional," commented Instructor Valdris after the exercise, "but effective. You used deception rather than force, turned the enemy's aggression against them. These are valuable insights." As the cycles passed, Marcus began to notice patterns in how his classmates approach problems. The Corellians relied on their natural spatial awareness and instinctive understanding of hyperspace mechanics. The Greth brought methodical analysis and incredible patience to every challenge. The Vorthack could process multiple probability streams simultaneously, allowing them to anticipate enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Each species had their strengths, but they also had blind spots, limitations imposed by their evolutionary history and cultural conditioning. Marcus, as a baseline human, lacked the specialized abilities that gave his classmates their advantages. But he also lacked their constraints. It was this realization that led him to his first major breakthrough. The Academy's Advanced Tactics course included a module on fighting the Void Wraiths, the mysterious entities that had been harassing Coalition space for decades. The Wraiths seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, making them nearly impossible to predict or counter. Every conventional tactical approach had proven inadequate against their hit-run attacks. Marcus spent hours in the Academy's vast library, studying every recorded encounter with the Wraiths. He noticed something that others had missed, a subtle pattern in their attack vectors that suggested they weren't as randomly motivated as everyone assumed. The Wraiths weren't just raiders, they were probing for something specific. When he presented his findings to the Advanced Tactics Council, the response was immediate and intense. Instructor Valders called for an emergency session, and within hours, Marcus found himself facing a panel of the Academy's most senior faculty members. "Explain your reasoning, Cadet Shun," directed Admiral Kethvar, a massive Thraxian whose cybernetic implants glowed softly in the chamber's dim lighting. Marcus activated the holographic display and began walking through his analysis. Every Void Wraith attack over the past 10 years has occurred within 50 light-years of a Class A stellar phenomenon. Supernovae, neutron star collisions, black hole formations. At first, I thought this was coincidence, but the correlation is too strong. They're not just attacking randomly. They're systematically investigating areas where space-time has been recently disrupted. And what do you conclude from this observation? Asked Dr. Sellen, the Vorthack theoretical physicist whose work on dimensional mechanics was legendary throughout the galaxy. I think they're looking for something, or someone. The question is whether we can use this predictive behavior against them. The panel exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, Admiral Kethvar leaned forward. "What you've discovered, Cadet Shun, has implications that extend far beyond your current understanding. Your analysis will be forwarded to Coalition intelligence for further review." He paused, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed to weigh his soul. "In the meantime, you are to continue your studies as normal. Do not discuss your findings with your fellow cadets." As Marcus left the chamber, he caught a glimpse of Instructor Valdres speaking quietly with Dr. Sellen. Their body language suggested intense concern, and he heard fragments of their conversation, something about the prophecies and earlier than expected. That night, Marcus lay awake staring out at the stars and wondering what he had stumbled into. The Academy had seemed like an impossible dream, a place where he didn't belong. But now he was beginning to suspect that his presence here might not be the accident everyone assumed. In the darkness beyond his viewport, something moved among the stars. For just a moment, Marcus thought he saw the outline of a massive shape blocking out the light of distant suns. But when he looked again, there was nothing but the eternal dance of galaxies across the infinite void. The Academy continued to turn in its ancient orbit, carrying its students ever closer to a destiny none of them fully understood. And in the deepest vaults beneath the crystalline spires, something that had been sleeping for millennia began to stir, awakened by the approach of events that had been foretold since the Academy's founding. Marcus Chun, the accidental cadet who should never have been there, closed his eyes and dreamed of dragons made of starlight and shadows that spoke in voices like breaking worlds. When he woke, he could remember none of it, but his pillow was damp with tears he couldn't explain. The next day brought news that would change everything. Admiral Kethvar announced during the morning assembly that this year's class will be the first in 50 cycles to face the final trial. The timing was unusual. Traditionally, the trial was reserved for the Academy's most senior students, those who had completed the full 7-cycle program. But these were unusual times, and the galaxy needed leaders now more than ever. As the cadets filed out of the assembly hall, Marcus caught sight of a figure he hadn't seen before, an elderly woman in robes that seemed to shift between colors depending on the angle of view. She stood at the back of the hall, watching the students with eyes that held depths Marcus couldn't fathom. When their gazes met, she smiled and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging an old friend. Marcus had never seen her before in his life, but something about that smile filled him with a mixture of anticipation and dread that he couldn't shake. Whatever was coming, whatever the final trial would bring, he suspected his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The Academy turned on through space, carrying its cargo of future leaders toward a confrontation that had been building since the first ships had dared to challenge the darkness between the stars. The Academy's training intensified dramatically following the announcement of the final trial. What had been challenging coursework became a grueling marathon of tests designed to push each cadet beyond their species' natural limitations. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were consumed hastily between simulations, and the relaxed camaraderie that had developed among the students gradually gave way to fierce competition. Marcus found himself struggling to keep pace with his enhanced classmates. While Zefek could navigate complex hyperspace calculations in his head, and Lyralii could process multiple tactical scenarios simultaneously, Marcus had to rely on methodical analysis and creative problem-solving. It should have been a losing strategy, but somehow he continued to excel in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. The woman he'd seen at the assembly had become a regular presence around the Academy. Instructor Valdris introduced her as Dr. Elan Zhao, a special consultant brought in to observe the final trial preparations. She never taught classes or gave lectures, but Marcus often noticed her watching from the back of simulation chambers or standing quietly in the library while he researched. One evening, as Marcus worked late in the Academy's vast archives, researching historical instances of unconventional tactical thinking, Dr. Zhao approached his table. "Finding what you're looking for?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him without invitation. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," Marcus admitted. "Every time I think I understand something, it leads to more questions." Dr. Zhao smiled. "An excellent habit for someone who might soon face the trial. Tell me, what do you know about the Academy's founding?" Marcus frowned, unsure why she was asking. Standard history says it was established by the Council of Races after the first Void Wraith incursions, as a way to develop unified command structures for the Coalition fleets. Standard history, Dr. Zhao repeated, her tone suggesting there might be more to the story. "And what do you know about the final trial itself?" "Only rumors. Something about proving yourself worthy to command, but no one talks about what actually happens." Dr. Zhao was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed much older than her apparent age. Finally, she spoke. "The Academy was built around something that was already here," she said. "In this region of space, between the dying stars, there exists something that your people might call a dragon. Not a creature of flesh and blood, but something far older and more powerful. An entity that has slept in the void for millions of years, dreaming of times when the galaxy was young." Marcus stared at her. "That's impossible. Our sensors would have detected. Your sensors detect what they're designed to detect," Dr. Zhao interrupted gently. "Three-dimensional matter and energy, gravity wells, electromagnetic radiation. The dragon exists in spaces between those dimensions, in the gaps where your instruments cannot reach. Why are you telling me this?" "Because the final trial is not what the cadets believe. It's not a test of worthiness, but an awakening. The dragon chooses its heir based on criteria that have nothing to do with genetic enhancement or traditional qualifications." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And I believe it has already chosen you." Before Marcus could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the Academy. Emergency lighting bathed the library in red, and Instructor Valdris's voice echoed through the communication system. "All cadets report to battle stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Marcus and Dr. Zhao hurried toward the Academy's command center, joining streams of cadets and instructors moving through corridors that now hummed with purposeful energy. The Academy's peaceful academic atmosphere had vanished, replaced by the efficient urgency of a military installation preparing for combat. The command center was a vast spherical chamber at the Academy's heart, its walls displaying real-time tactical information from across the galaxy. As Marcus entered, he could see why the alarm had been raised. A massive fleet of unknown ships was approaching the Academy's position, their configuration unlike anything in the Coalition databases. Void Wraiths breathed Zifek, his bioluminescent patterns flashing in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated fear. But there's so many of them. Admiral Kethvar stood at the center of the chamber, his cybernetic implants blazing as he coordinated defensive preparations. All available Academy vessels are being recalled, he announced to the assembled cadets. The perimeter defense fleet is moving to intercept, but preliminary analysis suggests the enemy force significantly outnumbers our available ships. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the Wraith's approach vector and formation. Something about their positioning troubled him, but he couldn't immediately identify what. "Sir," he called out, raising his hand. "Permission to speak?" Admiral Kethvar's glowing eyes fixed on him. "What is it, Cadet Shun?" "Their formation is wrong for an assault," Marcus said, stepping closer to the display. "Look at their spacing and approach angle. They're not positioning for a direct attack on the Academy. They're trying to surround it completely." "Explain." Marcus manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the Wraith fleet's movement patterns. If they wanted to destroy the Academy, they'd concentrate their firepower and hit us hard and fast. But they're spreading out, moving to cut off all escape routes. They're not here to destroy. They're here to capture something. Dr. Selen, who had been monitoring the sensor readings, looked up from her station. "The human is correct. Energy signatures suggest they're preparing some kind of containment field, not weapon systems." A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he realized the implications. They know about the dragon. Dr. Zhao, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "They've been searching for it for decades. My research into their attack patterns was only the beginning. The Void Wraiths aren't just raiders. They're servants of something that wants to claim the dragon's power for itself." Admiral Kethvar's expression grew grim. "If that's true, then we cannot allow the Academy to fall. The dragon's power in the wrong hands could tip the balance of the entire galaxy." He turned to the assembled cadets. "The final trial was to begin in 10 cycles. Circumstances have forced us to accelerate that timeline. The trial begins now." The command center erupted in surprised voices, but Admiral Kethvar silenced them with a gesture. "Cadets, you will be divided into teams and assigned to the Academy's defense fleet. Your performance in the coming battle will determine who advances to face the trial itself." As the cadets were sorted into groups, Marcus found himself assigned to the command crew of the Academy's newest vessel, the Stellar Dawn, an experimental hybrid ship that combined technologies from multiple Coalition species. To his surprise, Sarachin 7742 was assigned as his tactical officer, while Zefek would serve as navigator and Lyralii as communication specialist. "This is it," Sarah said as they made their way to the docking bays. "Everything we've trained for." Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that their training had been woefully inadequate for what they were about to face. The Void Wraiths had been terrorizing Coalition space for decades, and the galaxy's best military minds had failed to develop effective countermeasures against them. The Stellar Dawn was beautiful and terrifying, a sleek vessel whose hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. The bridge was a fusion of organic curves and crystalline surfaces that responded to the crew's thoughts as much as their words. As Marcus settled into the captain's chair, he felt the ship's systems reaching out to interface with his nervous system, creating a connection that was both exhilarating and unsettling. "All ships report ready," came Admiral Kethvar's voice over the communication system. "Academy Defense Fleet, you are cleared to engage the enemy. Remember, Your primary objective is to prevent them from completing their containment field. Secondary objective is to gather intelligence on their capabilities and weaknesses. The Stellar Dawn launched from the Academy's docking bay along with 17 other Academy vessels, each crewed by teams of cadets under the supervision of senior instructors. As they moved into formation, Marcus could see the Void Wraith fleet growing larger on the view screen, dark shapes that seemed to bend light around them, making them difficult to target or even properly observe. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported Zifek, his hands dancing over the navigation controls with fluid precision. Enemy vessels are not responding to standard communication protocols. They never do, Sarah said grimly, her fingers flying over the tactical display as she prepared weapon systems. Wraith ships don't seem to have crews in any sense we understand. They might be automated or controlled by something we can't detect. As the two fleets closed on each other, Marcus studied the enemy formation one more time. The Wraith's positioning still bothered him, and he found himself thinking about their conversation with Dr. Zhao. If the Wraiths truly served something that wanted the dragon's power, then their strategy might be more sophisticated than anyone realized. "Lyralii, can you scan for any unusual energy signatures?" he asked. "Not weapons or shields, but something else. Maybe dimensional distortions or space-time anomalies?" The Vorthax's translucent features rippled with concentration as she extended her natural sensing abilities through the ship's instruments. After a moment, her expression changed to one of alarm. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy buildups at specific points in the Wraith formation. It's not weapons. It's like they're preparing to tear holes in space itself." Marcus's blood went cold. They're not trying to contain the dragon with ships. They're planning to open dimensional rifts and drag it into whatever realm they come from. "All ships, this is Admiral Kethvar," came the voice over the communication system. "Be advised, long-range sensors are detecting massive dimensional disturbances. The enemy appears to be attempting some kind of space-time manipulation. We have to stop them before they complete the ritual," Marcus said, his mind racing through possibilities. "Sarah, target those energy buildup points. Zefek, plot intercept courses for the primary nodes. Lyralii, try to jam whatever dimensional frequencies they're using." The Academy fleet engaged the Wraiths in a battle unlike anything Marcus had imagined. The enemy ships moved in ways that defied physics, phasing in and out of normal space, attacking from impossible angles, and shrugging off energy weapons that should have destroyed them instantly. But the Academy vessels were no ordinary ships. Each incorporated technologies and tactical doctrines from the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and their crews had been trained to think beyond conventional limitations. Marcus found himself fighting not just against enemy ships, but against his own preconceptions about how space combat should work. The Wraiths weren't bound by the same rules that govern coalition vessels, so defeating them required abandoning traditional tactics entirely. "Use the gravitational fields of the dying stars," he ordered, watching as Zefek's eyes widened with understanding. "If the Wraiths exist partially outside normal space, maybe we can use gravity to pin them down." It was a desperate gambit, but it worked. By coordinating their movements with the Academy's other ships, they managed to create a series of gravitational anomalies that trapped several Wraith vessels in normal space long enough to destroy them. But even as they celebrated their small victories, Marcus could see that the battle was far from won. The Wraith's dimensional manipulation was nearing completion, and reality itself was beginning to warp around the Academy. Stars flickered and changed color, space twisted into impossible configurations, and through the growing rifts, Marcus could glimpse something vast and hungry moving in the darkness between dimensions. "All Academy vessels, fall back to defensive positions," commanded Admiral Kethvar. "The dimensional disturbance has reached critical levels. We're evacuating non-essential personnel and preparing for emergency protocols." But Marcus knew that falling back wouldn't be enough. Whatever the Wraiths were summoning, it was already beginning to probe the boundaries between worlds. Soon it would break through entirely, and when it did, the dragon's power would be the least of their worries. As the stellar dawn raced back toward the academy, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of heading for the evacuation zones, he ordered Zfek to plot a course for the academy's central core, the region where Dr. Zhao claimed the dragon slept. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Sarah demanded. "We have orders to evacuate. The Wraiths are trying to steal something that doesn't belong to them," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Maybe it's time to wake up the rightful owner." As they approached the academy's innermost chambers, Marcus felt something stirring in the depths of space, something ancient and powerful that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The final trial wasn't just beginning. It had been building to this confrontation for centuries. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a dragon made of light and shadow opened eyes that had been closed since the galaxy was young. The Academy's central core was unlike anything Marcus had imagined. As the stellar dawn descended through layers of defensive barriers and security fields, the normal geometry of space began to break down. Corridors curved back on themselves. Rooms existed in impossible orientations, and gravity flowed in directions that had no names in any language. "Sensor readings are becoming unreliable," Lyralii reported, her usually calm voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's like we're moving through layers of folded reality." "The dimensional stress from the Wraith attack is causing spatial distortions," Sarah added, studying her tactical displays with growing concern. "The Academy's internal structure is becoming unstable." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else, a presence that seemed to press against the edges of his consciousness, vast and ancient and slowly awakening. As they moved deeper into the core, that presence grew stronger until it felt like standing next to an ocean that was beginning to stir. Dr. Zhao's voice crackled over the communication system. "Cadet Shun, what you're feeling is the dragon beginning to wake. The dimensional disturbance caused by the Wraith attack has disrupted its sleep cycle. But be warned, an awakening dragon is not necessarily a friendly dragon. Can you guide us to wherever it's actually located?" Marcus asked. "Follow the gravitational anomalies," came the reply. "The dragon exists in a space that intersects with our reality at multiple points. The strongest intersection should be directly below the Academy's ceremonial chamber." As they approached the designated coordinates, the stellar dawn suddenly lurched as if caught in a powerful current. Through the viewports, Marcus could see space itself rippling like water, and in the distance, something enormous was moving through dimensions that human eyes weren't designed to perceive. "Contact with Academy Command lost," Zfek reported. "Local communications only. Emergency bulkheads are sealing throughout the ship," Sarah added. "Whatever's happening, the ship's safety systems think we're in immediate danger." Marcus was about to respond when the universe exploded around them. One moment they were flying through distorted but recognizable space. The next, they were falling through a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and geometries. The ship's instruments screamed warnings about gravitational forces that shouldn't exist and energy readings that broke the scales of measurement. Then, suddenly, they were floating in a sphere of perfect calm. The stellar dawn drifted in what appeared to be a vast cavern made of crystallized starlight, its walls pulsing with patterns that seemed to follow the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. At the center of the space, coiled around itself like a sleeping cat, was the dragon. It was beautiful and terrifying beyond description. Its body seemed to be composed of condensed galaxies, stars forming and dying along its scales in accelerated time. Its wings were constructed from the fabric of space itself, while its eyes, currently closed, held depths that suggested awareness spanning geological ages. "By all the stars," whispered Lyralii, "it's real." As if responding to her voice, the dragon's eyes opened. The moment of contact was indescribable. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual mind, touching something so vast and ancient that it made the entirety of human civilization seem like a brief flicker. He saw the birth of the galaxy, the rise and fall of countless species, the endless dance of creation and destruction that defined existence itself. And through it all, he felt the dragon's amusement. So came a voice that wasn't quite heard, but rather experienced directly in his thoughts. Another false heir comes to claim power they cannot comprehend. How many have stood before me over the centuries, convinced of their worthiness? How many have begged for strength to command fleets and conquer worlds? Marcus found his voice, though speaking to such a being felt presumptuous beyond measure. I'm not here to claim anything. I'm here because something is trying to steal you, and that doesn't seem right. The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, a motion that sent ripples through the crystallized space around them. Interesting. You're not what I expected. For 700 years, the Academy has sent me their finest specimens. Enhanced beings bred for command, gifted individuals chosen by their civilizations, natural leaders who shine like stars among their peers. Each believed themselves worthy to inherit my power. Each failed to understand what that power truly means. Images flashed through Marcus's mind, scenes of past candidates facing the dragon. He saw beings of incredible ability and intelligence, representatives of species from across the galaxy, all convinced that their superiority qualified them to command the forces that protected civilization. He also saw how each had reacted when offered the dragon's true gift. Power, the dragon explained, is not the ability to command others or to bend the universe to your will. True power is the willingness to sacrifice everything, including yourself, for something greater than your own desires. These candidates wanted strength to achieve their ambitions. None were willing to accept strength that might require them to abandon those ambitions entirely. Marcus thought about his journey to the Academy, his struggles to keep up with genetically enhanced classmates, his constant feeling of being out of place among the galaxy's elite. I never thought I was worthy of anything. I'm just here because of a mistake. No, the dragon's voice carried notes of something that might have been approval. You are here because the universe occasionally produces individuals who understand that worthiness is not about superiority. It is about service. Through the crystallized walls, Marcus could see flashes of light that suggested the battle between the Academy fleet and the Void Wraiths was intensifying. Space itself was beginning to tear apart as the dimensional rifts expanded. They served the Devourers, the dragon explained, following his gaze. Entities from the spaces between realities who consume entire universes to fuel their own existence. They have sought my power for millennia, knowing that a being such as myself could provide them with access to every inhabited galaxy in this local cluster. Can you stop them? I could, but doing so would require me to act directly in your reality, and such action would tear apart this entire star system. Everything within 1,000 light years would cease to exist. Marcus felt his heart sink. The choice was between allowing the Devourers to claim the dragon's power, dooming the entire galaxy, or stopping them at the cost of billions of lives. There has to be another way. There is, the dragon said quietly. But it requires someone willing to accept a burden that will last for the remainder of their existence. Someone willing to become something more than human, but also something less. Someone willing to serve as my herald in the physical universe, wielding my power, but never for their own benefit. Marcus understood immediately. The dragon wasn't looking for a commander or a leader. It was looking for a guardian, someone who could channel its power to protect the galaxy while ensuring that power was never used for personal gain. What happens to me if I accept? You will remain Marcus Chun, but you will also become something else. My will and yours will be linked but not merged. You will gain the ability to command forces beyond imagination, but only when that command serves the greater good. You will live far beyond a normal human lifespan, but much of that life will be spent alone, as others will find it difficult to relate to what you have become. Through the walls, Marcus could see that the dimensional rifts were expanding rapidly. Soon they would reach critical mass, and the barriers between realities would collapse entirely. "Do it," he said without hesitation. The dragon regarded him for a long moment. "Are you certain? This is not a decision that can be undone. You will never again be able to live a simple human life." Marcus thought about his classmates, fighting desperately against impossible odds. He thought about the Academy's instructors, dedicating their lives to training the next generation of galactic defenders. He thought about Earth and all the other worlds whose people live their daily lives without knowing that cosmic predators stalk them from the spaces between stars. "I'm certain what happened next transcended physical experience." Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of individual existence, while simultaneously becoming more focused and purposeful than ever before. Power flowed through him, not the crude strength of weapons or ships, but something far more fundamental: the ability to reshape reality itself, to command the forces that held galaxies together, to stand as guardian against the darkness that lurked beyond the edges of known space. But with that power came understanding of its terrible weight. He could feel the dragon's presence permanently intertwined with his own, a constant reminder that every use of this gift must be measured against the costs. He could sense the lives of trillions of sentient beings across the galaxy, each one now partially his responsibility. When the transformation completed, Marcus opened eyes that now held depths of starlight. He could perceive dimensions that had been invisible to him before, could feel the flow of cosmic forces that shaped the universe itself. And he could see exactly how to stop the void wraiths without destroying the star system. "Go," the dragon whispered in his mind. "Show them what it means to face a true guardian of this reality." Marcus nodded and reached out with his newfound abilities, teleporting himself and his crew back to the stellar dawn. As they materialized on the bridge, his teammates stared at him in amazement and concern. "Marcus," Sarah asked tentatively, "what happened to you?" "I accepted a job offer," Marcus replied, his voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull resonate. "Now, let's go save the galaxy." As the stellar dawn emerged from the Academy's core, Marcus could see the full scope of the battle raging outside. The Academy's defensive fleet was scattered and heavily damaged, while the void wraith dimensional rifts had grown so large that alien geometries were bleeding through into normal space. But Marcus could also see something his instruments couldn't detect: the threads of power that connected the wraith vessels to their masters in the space between realities. More importantly, he could see how to sever those connections. "Zefek, plot a course directly through the center of their formation," he ordered. "Sarah, power down all weapon systems." "Marcus, that's suicide," Sarah protested. "Their ships will tear us apart." "No," Marcus replied, feeling the dragon's power flowing through him like a river of liquid starlight. "They won't." As the stellar dawn accelerated toward the void wraith fleet, Marcus reached out with abilities that human language had no words to describe. He touched the dimensional barriers that separated realities, found the weak points where the Devourers had forced their way through, and began to seal them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Wraith ships that had been phasing in and out of normal space suddenly became solid, their otherworldly advantages stripped away. The dimensional rifts began to contract as their connection to the space between realities was severed. But the Devourers weren't finished. As their servants lost their supernatural abilities, something vast and hungry began forcing its way through the largest remaining rift, a presence that made the dragon seem small by comparison. One of the great Devourers, the dragon's voice whispered in Marcus's mind, a being that has consumed entire galactic clusters. "Even with my power, you may not be able to defeat it directly." Marcus studied the emerging entity and felt a chill of cosmic dread. The thing was enormous beyond comprehension, its very presence causing stars to flicker and die. Direct confrontation would indeed be impossible. But Marcus had learned something important during his time at the Academy. Sometimes the best solution wasn't the most obvious one. Lyralii, can you establish communication with Admiral Kethvar? Communication systems are back online, the Vorthack reported. You're connected to Academy Command. Admiral, Marcus said, I need you to evacuate all Academy personnel to minimum safe distance. I'm going to try something unconventional. Admiral Kethvar's voice crackled over the communication system. Cadet Shun, what exactly are you planning? Marcus smiled, feeling the dragon's approval flowing through their shared consciousness. I'm going to give our unwelcome guest exactly what it wants, and trust that its appetite is larger than its intelligence. As the Academy fleet pulled back to safe distance, Marcus reached out with the dragon's power and did something that defied every principle of cosmic safety. Instead of trying to close the dimensional rift, he opened it wider, much wider. The Great Devourer, sensing an unprecedented opportunity to access this reality, surged forward eagerly. But as it pushed through the enlarged rift, Marcus activated the second part of his plan. Using the dragon's mastery of dimensional mechanics, he folded space around the rift, creating a closed loop that connected back to itself. The Great Devourer found itself trapped in a dimensional prison of its own making, forever falling through a tunnel that led only back to its beginning. The remaining Void Wraiths, cut off from their master's power, were quickly eliminated by the Academy fleet. The dimensional rifts sealed themselves as the exotic energies that had torn them open were exhausted. And, in the sudden silence that followed, Marcus felt the dragon's satisfaction echoing through his transformed consciousness. Well done, came the ancient voice. You understood that sometimes the most effective victory is the one that turns the enemy's strength against them. As the stellar dawn returned to the Academy, Marcus looked out at his crewmates and realized that his old life was truly over. He was no longer just Marcus Chun, maintenance engineer from Earth. He was something new, a bridge between human understanding and cosmic power, a guardian sworn to protect realities that most beings couldn't even perceive. It would be a lonely existence in many ways, but as he watched his friends celebrating their survival, he knew it was a burden worth bearing. The Academy floated peacefully in the void once more, its crystalline spires catching the light of distant stars. But deep in its core, something that had slept for ages was now awake and watchful, its power wielded by an unlikely guardian who understood that true strength came not from superiority, but from service. The final trial was complete, but Marcus suspected that his real trials were just beginning. 3 months had passed since the attack on the Academy, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the revelations that had emerged from that chaotic day. The existence of the dragon, now referred to in official reports as Entity Omega, had been classified at the highest levels, but word had begun to spread among the Coalition's leadership that humanity's newest representative carried power beyond conventional understanding. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship Destiny's Edge, watching as supply ships moved between the massive vessels of the assembled fleet. 300 ships from 40 different species all gathered to address what intelligence reports were calling the Devourer Crisis. It had taken weeks to fully understand the scope of the threat they had barely averted. The Great Devourer, trapped in Marcus's dimensional prison, was not alone. It was part of a vast collective of entities that existed in the spaces between realities, consuming entire universes to sustain their incomprehensible existence. The attack on the Academy had been just the beginning of what appeared to be a systematic invasion of their reality. The briefing is about to begin, Sarah said, approaching from behind. She wore the uniform of a Coalition tactical analyst now, having been fast-tracked through the Academy's remaining programs following her performance during the crisis. Admiral Kethvar wants all senior staff present. Marcus nodded, though he found it strange to be considered senior staff when he had never officially graduated from the Academy. The transformation he had undergone made such considerations irrelevant. The Coalition's leadership had quickly recognized that their new situation required entirely new approaches to command structure. As they made their way through the flagship's corridors, Marcus was acutely aware of how other crew members reacted to his presence. There was respect, certainly, but also uncertainty and sometimes fear. The dragon's power had changed him in ways that were visible to anyone who looked closely. His eyes held depths that seemed to reflect distant galaxies, and space itself seemed to bend slightly around him when he moved. The briefing room was packed with the Coalition's most senior commanders, representatives from dozens of species seated around a holographic display that showed the current state of galactic defenses. Admiral HFY stood at the center, his cybernetic implants glowing as he integrated data from across the galaxy's surveillance networks. The situation continues to deteriorate. The Admiral began without preamble. Since the Academy incident, we've detected dimensional instabilities in 17 star systems. 3 of those systems have gone completely dark. No communications, no sensor readings, nothing. Long-range scouts report that the affected areas appear to be empty. Not destroyed. Empty, as if they never existed. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembled commanders. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the pattern of affected systems. They formed a rough spiral leading toward the galaxy's core, exactly what he would expect if something was methodically consuming realities from the outside in. Intelligence suggests that the entities responsible are similar to the one we encountered at the Academy, Admiral HFY continued. But preliminary analysis indicates they may be employing different tactics. Instead of attempting to steal existing power sources, they appear to be creating their own entry points into our reality. Dr. Zhao, who had been granted special advisory status following her role in the Academy crisis, stepped forward. "The Devourers are learning," she said, her expression grim. "Our victory at the Academy forced them to adapt their strategy. They're no longer trying to find existing weaknesses in the barriers between realities. They're creating new ones." Commander Vextar, the Greth representative who had served alongside Marcus during their Academy training, raised one of his massive stone arms. "With respect to our human colleagues, the question we must ask is whether this new threat can be addressed using conventional military force. The Academy fleet was helpless against a single incursion. How do we fight an enemy that can erase entire star systems?" All eyes turned to Marcus, and he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him like a physical force. The dragon's voice whispered in his mind, offering guidance, but the final decisions and their consequences would be his alone. "The Devourers aren't invincible," Marcus said, standing to address the assembled commanders. "They're incredibly powerful, but they're also constrained by the laws that govern dimensional interfaces. Every incursion they create weakens the barriers between realities, making it harder for them to maintain multiple operations simultaneously." He gestured to the tactical display, highlighting the affected systems. "Look at the pattern of attacks. They're not random. They're following lines of dimensional weakness that already exist in our local galactic cluster. If we can identify those weak points before they do, we can potentially strengthen them or set traps." Admiral HFY's mechanical features whirred as he processed this information. What would such operations require in terms of resources and personnel? Small, highly mobile teams capable of operating in areas where normal physics becomes unreliable, Marcus replied. "Traditional fleet actions won't work against enemies that can phase out of normal space at will. We need task forces that can adapt to changing conditions in real time." "And who would command these task forces?" asked Admiral Sevlin, a tall, graceful being whose species communicated partially through color changes in their crystalline skin. Marcus had been expecting this question, and his answer sent ripples of surprise through the assembled commanders. "The Academy cadets who survived the initial crisis. My classmates, and I have experience fighting in dimensionally unstable environments. More importantly, we've learned to think beyond conventional tactical doctrine." The suggestion was unprecedented, assigning critical missions to beings who had never completed their formal training. But as discussion flowed around the briefing room, Marcus could sense growing acceptance of the idea. The old ways of thinking were proving inadequate to address threats that operated by entirely different rules. Over the following hours, the coalition's leadership worked to develop a new strategic doctrine based on Marcus's recommendations. Small, mixed-species teams would be deployed to identify dimensional weak points, equipped with the most advanced technology available and given unprecedented autonomy to adapt their missions as conditions required. Marcus found himself appointed as overall coordinator for these operations, a position that made him one of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy despite his humble origins. The irony was not lost on him. The maintenance engineer who had never wanted to command anything was now responsible for defending entire civilizations. As the briefing concluded and commanders dispersed to prepare their contributions to the new effort, Dr. Zhao approached Marcus. "How are you adapting to your new situation?" she asked, her tone conveying both curiosity and concern. "Some days are easier than others," Marcus admitted. "The dragon helps me understand the cosmic implications of what we're facing, but the human part of me still struggles with the responsibility. And your relationships with your former classmates?" Marcus glanced across the room to where Sarah, Zefek, and Lyralii were deep in conversation with other tactical specialists. "They're trying to treat me the same as before, but we all know everything has changed. I'm not really Marcus Chun anymore, even though I'm trying to hold on to the parts of myself that made me who I was." Dr. Zhao nodded thoughtfully. "The burden of power is always isolation, to some degree. But remember that even gods need friends." 2 days later, Marcus found himself aboard the Stellar Dawn once again, leading the first mission to test their new tactical doctrine. The target was a system on the outer rim where dimensional sensors had detected early signs of devourer activity, space-time distortions that suggested the barriers between realities were beginning to weaken. His crew was the same as during the Academy crisis, though their roles had evolved. Sarah served as a strategic advisor. Zefek handled navigation through dimensionally unstable regions, and Lyralii coordinated communications between team members whose individual perceptions of reality might not always align. Approaching the target system, Zefek reported as they dropped out of hyperspace. "Sensor readings are unusual." Marcus could see what he meant. The system star flickered unpredictably between different colors and energy outputs, while its planets seemed to phase in and out of existence. Space itself had a twisted quality that made distance measurements unreliable. "Dimensional instability is severe, but not yet critical," Lyralii added, her natural sensitivity to energy patterns allowing her to perceive things that instruments couldn't detect. "I'm reading what might be structural damage to reality itself." Through his connection to the dragon, Marcus could sense the underlying problem. The Devourers weren't trying to force their way into this system. They were slowly dissolving the foundations that held it in normal space-time, causing it to gradually drift toward the spaces between realities where they could consume it at their leisure. "It's more sophisticated than what they tried at the Academy," he said. "They're not rushing this time. They're being patient, systematic." "Can we stop it?" Sarah asked. Marcus reached out with his enhanced perception, feeling for the weak points where the dissolution process was most active. What he found surprised him. The damage wasn't random. It followed specific patterns that suggested the Devourers understood far more about the structure of reality than he had given them credit for. They're using the system's own gravitational fields against it, he realized, creating feedback loops that gradually destabilize the dimensional boundaries. Clever. "So what's our counter-strategy?" Marcus smiled, feeling the dragon's approval as a solution formed in his mind. "We're going to make them overconfident. Zefek, plot a course that takes us directly through the most unstable region. Sarah, power down all defensive systems. Lyralii, start broadcasting distress signals on all frequencies." His crew stared at him in alarm. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, "that sounds suspiciously like suicide." "Trust me," Marcus replied, his eyes beginning to glow with inner starlight. "Sometimes the best trap is one that looks like an accident." As the stellar dawn moved deeper into the destabilized system, Marcus began to carefully extend his connection to the dragon's power. He made the energy signature as faint as possible, disguised as normal drive emissions and electrical system noise. To any watching devourers, it would appear that their ship was simply another victim caught in the dissolution field. The response was immediate. Sensors detected massive dimensional distortions approaching their position as devourer entities moved in to claim what they assumed was helpless prey. Contact in 30 seconds, Zefek reported, his patterns flashing with nervous energy. Whatever you're planning, now would be a good time to implement it. Marcus nodded and released the full power of his connection to the dragon. But instead of using it as a weapon, he channeled it into the system's failing dimensional structure itself. The effect was like pouring liquid steel into cracks in a foundation. The weak points that the devourers had been exploiting suddenly became reinforced barriers that trapped them in normal space. The devourers found themselves caught in exactly the situation they had been trying to avoid, forced to fight in a reality where the normal laws of physics applied, without their usual ability to phase between dimensions. What followed was less a battle than an educational demonstration. Marcus's team, trained to fight in dimensionally unstable environments, had every advantage against enemies who were suddenly constrained by the same physical laws that governed their own actions. "Well," Sarah said as the last devourer entity was eliminated, "that was surprisingly straightforward." "The first one always is," Marcus replied, though he could feel the dragon's warning echoing in his mind. The entities they had just defeated were scouts, not the true threats. The real devourers were still learning about their new opponents, and when they finally committed to serious action, the results would be far more challenging. Over the following months, Marcus led a dozen similar missions, each one teaching him more about how the devourers operated and what it would take to defeat them permanently. His teams grew more skilled at operating in impossible environments, while the coalition scientists developed new technologies based on insights gleaned from dragon-enhanced perception. But Marcus also found himself changing in ways that worried him. The constant use of cosmic-level power was gradually eroding his connection to human experience. He could perceive the flow of time across galactic distances, could sense the birth and death of stars as immediate experiences, could feel the consciousness of every sentient being within 1,000 light years. It was becoming harder to remember why he should care about individual lives when he could perceive the vast patterns that governed entire civilizations. The dragon, sensing his struggle, offered guidance. "This is why the previous candidates failed," the ancient voice whispered in his mind. "Power of this magnitude inevitably leads to isolation from the very things it was meant to protect. The challenge is not to resist the change, but to find new ways to remain connected to what matters." "How?" Marcus asked during one of their private communications. "Remember that you were chosen not because you were superior, but because you understood service. That understanding must evolve as you evolve, but it must not be lost." Marcus thought about this conversation as he stood on the Academy's observation deck, watching new cadets participate in training exercises that now included preparation for dimensional combat. The galaxy was learning to adapt to threats that previous generations could never have imagined, and humanity was playing a central role in that adaptation. Dr. Zhao approached from behind, as she often did when he needed to talk. Contemplating the cosmic burden of power, she asked with gentle humor. "Trying to figure out how to stay human while becoming something else," Marcus replied. "The dragon's power gives me the ability to protect trillions of lives, but it also makes it harder to understand why any individual life should matter." "Perhaps," Dr. Zhao suggested, "the answer lies not in choosing between the cosmic and the personal, but in finding ways to honor both simultaneously." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah appeared at Marcus's side. "The new mission briefings are ready," she said. "Intelligence has identified what they believe is a major devourer staging area in the Helix Nebula. The Admiral wants to know if our teams are ready for a large-scale operation." Marcus studied his reflection in the observation port, seeing eyes that now held depths of starlight, and feeling the constant presence of power that could reshape reality itself. But he also saw the face of a young man from Earth who had never wanted anything more than to understand how starships worked. "Yes," he said finally. "We're ready." As they walked toward the briefing room, Marcus felt the dragon's approval flowing through their shared consciousness. The path ahead would be challenging, and he would continue to change in ways that sometimes frightened him. But he was beginning to understand that growth, even cosmic growth, didn't have to mean abandoning everything that made him who he was. The galaxy needed guardians who could wield power beyond imagination, while never forgetting what it felt like to be small and vulnerable and afraid. In choosing Marcus Chun, maintenance engineer and accidental cadet, the dragon had found exactly what it was looking for. The Academy continued its eternal orbit between dying stars, training new generations of defenders for threats that existed beyond normal comprehension. And at its heart, the bond between an ancient cosmic entity and a young human grew stronger, preparing for challenges that would determine whether their reality would survive the hunger of beings that devoured universes. The final trial was complete, but the real test was just beginning.